Traders, this is Christian from Rich Trade Group, and this is your end of day and end of market recap for Friday, November 7th. Happy Friday, everybody. What a day that was, huh? What a week. What a start to the month of November. Holy cow. Some interesting stuff. Really nice with, you can see on the spreadsheet that I've got in front of you, that this was quite a turnaround from where we were about midday. Things looked pretty ugly. It looked like we had some levels to continue to kind of go down and test. It looked like maybe we would finally get some of those oversold type readings, but the market kind of flipped, and we don't usually see that on a Friday. When the market's kind of under some stress, short-term stress, we don't markets don't usually bottom on a Friday, but we're also dealing with a little bit of a headline-driven market, and we know that as this this government shutdown has progressed, it's going to get worse and worse, and that's something that I've discussed in many of my end of day videos. That hey, shutting the government down for a couple days, even probably for a couple weeks, doesn't really affect things too much. But as you continue to go along and people don't get paid, and there's quite a bit of news coverage today at airports today, and that's a big thing, especially as we're coming up to one of the busiest holidays for travel in a couple weeks away, Thanksgiving. So in any event, that's kind of you know puts the screws towards some of these politicians to kind of get something done. We didn't hear about a deal, but I think the market took it as well. At least the fact that these sides are talking. They didn't agree on the first proposal, but I think they mentioned that they're going to be working this weekend. Hey, good job! You're actually going to be working this this weekend instead of just having time off all the time. That's wonderful that you actually have to do something. All right, enough negativity about that. Risk disclaimer in front of. Hey, come on, this it is what it is. If you're not making fun of these people at this point for putting the country in this predicament, I don't know what else to say. Risk disclaimer in front of you. Everything that we're going through, of course, is for information purposes only, not giving out any advice or recommendations. Everything is for education purposes only. Let me just flip the screen here so that we can concentrate on the numbers and not so much my dialogue about that stuff. But so where did we finish for the day? SPY finished in the green today, up 10 basis points. There is a really big turnaround there by small caps and micro caps and Bitcoin. I'm going to show you if I can show you the screen really quickly, because I thought that this was important. I guess I'll just have to leave it like this. So let me try just replacing. And I think you'll be able to see this. This is just one of the screens that I have up like on the side. It's just on the top is Bitcoin. The next one is S&P futures. The next is NASDAQ futures, and the last one is Russell futures. What I thought was particularly different today was this guy, Bitcoin. Right, so the S&P was still going down, NASDAQ still going down, and same thing with the Russell. But you could see like right around this point around, I think this was 9:30 in the morning, this dipped, and it got bought right away, and you could see that the trend started to change, like the price started to stay above these moving averages, and it kind of stood out to me. And S&P, of course, these things really didn't start to kind of get a little bit of a footing until we got to that lunchtime hour, which always is suspect to me, because you don't want to see your rally or your bounce really normally start at lunchtime, because that's the lowest volume time of the day. But at least if we start, it gives the bulls kind of something to feed off of a bit. And I think that's what we had a little bit today. And we carried that through 130, which is really the point that I watch and say, okay, was that just a low, the lowest volume part of the day bounce? Or is there something to it? And we actually carried through there 130. So that's what got me a bit more enthused about the bounce that started. We do Fridays, we do Q&A on Friday, and I was like, hey, as long as I keep talking, the market's going to keep going up. But anyway, I was joking around about that, but it was nice to see that carry through as our Q&A session went on. So what bounced the most from the lows, some of the kind of beaten up areas this week. And uranium was up 6% from the open. The uranium ETF up 1.4%. Metals and mining actually turned too, right? That was one of the market leaders this year was metals and mining, and that had a nice move today. Um, but yeah, a few of these areas really rallied from the move down, and a lot of weakness in the beginning of the day. And I will say this before I start going through the charts. Um, I I mentioned earlier that we did not really get oversold readings. We didn't get that oversold reading like we've gotten a couple other times this year with the McClellan oscillator, both for New York Stock Exchange as well as Nasdaq. So it would have been nice to get that, but we're dealing always with a market in uncertainty. Probability increases that you're going to get a nice rebound when we come to support and the McClellan oscillator is oversold. But it doesn't have to be that way, especially when we're dealing with headlines like we are right now with the government shutdown situation, which makes people uncomfortable. And by the way, I wouldn't normally think that that's the case, but I think as I said in yesterday's video, the stock market is a confidence game, right? You have to have a lot of confidence. You have to be somewhat optimistic, right, about the future. And if you kind of lose that confidence, or you're not, lose confidence in what the government is doing, or lose confidence about how things are doing, then people decide to kind of take profits in some things. So that said, let me get to some of the charts because I think that there's a lot to go over, and I don't want to make this a really long video for you as you head into the weekend. By the way, thank you for your feedback. I asked for some feedback when I sent out yesterday's video, and I appreciate that. So a lot of you said some nice things. Many of you didn't say so. No, I'm just kidding. So I really appreciate that, and it kind of helps me stay motivated. And I also want to make sure that I'm giving you good content in these end of day videos. Otherwise, it's not worth our time. So thank you again for joining in. And again, I do always appreciate the likes and the retweets. That helps me, and makes me want to sustain and keep doing these videos. So we did not completely fulfill this bearish 80% rule. Let me see if we got that in S&P futures really quickly. I just want to check something here. But we got very close to it. No, I don't think we did in S&P futures either. And again, it's an 80% rule. It's not a 100% rule. So things got very close. Here's your S&P futures. I'm going to go back to SPY now. One thing that I did notice, so that level, by the way, is 658.91. That's our support, just in case if we don't get to rebound off of this. This is a very nice hammer bar, which is sometimes the making of a turn. We're not above the 20-day. We're not above the 5. But yes, the 50-day moving average came into play today, and we got a nice bounce off of that. Also, note this other VPOC. Now, I really thought, and this is about making educated guesses in this game. Sometimes you're going to be right, sometimes you're going to be wrong. I really thought as we ended yesterday, I think we were sitting here and I'm like, hey, well, we're holding this. We're holding this VPOC, right? These are levels of interest. There's no guarantee that when we get to a support level or a level of interest as a virgin point of control is, where there can be demand there, because there's a lot of volume there. That's the situation. Point of controls that have not been touched before, right, represent a lot of volume. So this one did not hold, but the one down here did, right? And we came down here. Sometimes we go a little bit lower, and then we kind of push. So this value area, I would not. This is the value area for the month. So we still have more to do here. And that's fine. I think for one day, I think we made a lot of progress. We will have to get out of this little pattern of lower highs. Remember earlier in the week, this was a nice bounce, but we went right into resistance. Again, I thought we could kind of hang around here a little bit. We didn't. We went lower a couple days. So I think next week it'll be important for us to maybe get over at least like this 672.82 level, which is very close by. And that's something I'll be watching next week. What else did I want to cover here? Oh, one other thing, the point that I wanted to make too, and I just tweeted this out a little while ago, but it's kind of there's been a little bit of a coincidence here. The last few months, it didn't happen right away in the month of October. We spilled there a little bit later. That was around the 10th of the month. But if you go back to the beginning of August, if you go back to the beginning of September, both of those months started weak, right? And then we recovered. Remember August, right? We gapped down and then we began to crawl back up. Did the same thing here in the month of September. We gapped down to start the month. It was a weak first day. Now we finished off the lows there, but you could see we had to crawl back to those highs. Now, a little bit of a difference here is that we were more extended. And I thought originally when we started the month, with which was just on Monday, by the way, that we would get some weakness. But because we've had so many of these shallow dips, I did think that it was going to get bought a little bit quicker than what we saw today. But again, this government shutdown going on probably had something to do with that. And I'm not saying like, oh, that's all the reason that's happened. It's part of it. You know, so same thing with the Qs. The Qs also bounced off the 50-day moving average, did not complete the bearish 80% rule, and it will stay that way until if we get out of value, you don't have to worry about that bearish 80% rule anymore. Same thing with the SPY chart that I just showed you. I also want to the same thing with the 1 hour chart for the Qs. Notice the second VPOC being taken out there, and then a rebound. So again, we're close to breaking back above the value area. We'll have to kind of leave that for Sunday night futures. I think of these two groups that we're dealing with, our lovely political groups that we have, if they continue to talk over the weekend, maybe things will kind of progress. And yeah, so I'll leave it there for that little conversation. IWM, different looking picture, which again I've talked about quite a bit. That IWM is different looking. I think it's been under more pressure because of which started last week when we had. Right, was that last week when we had the Jay Powell meeting? I think it was when they talked about that the next rate cut is there's no guarantee of that. Well, IWM always gets hit more on that kind of situation. And notice that this also took out a VPOC and bounced. Again, still has more work to do. We're under the 50-day moving average, right? We're going to need to see some follow through. One day is not a pattern, right? Keep in mind. So we'll see if we get some follow through from that. Just to look at some of these other charts too, as we're now at the end of the week. IWC, your microcap ETF. Also, you're seeing like this pattern. These we came down to where there was a lot of volume previously, right? That's this point of control is where the majority of the volume occurred from the month of September. So we came back and revisited that and held that. What about the Dow? The Dow closed right at the top of the value area, a little bit stronger. Actually closed above. One other chart I'm going to bring up too is RSP. That's still below the 50-day moving average. Nice bullish looking candle there for the day, but that also has more work to do. And that actually, I believe, led today. It was up 0.8 of a percentage point today, which was the same. Yeah, I mean that led indices. Bitcoin. Let's talk about that for a minute. As I mentioned, that it started to move first. This still has more work to do, right? It did not get back above the 200-day moving average, right? That's another test, right? Here. So I would also watch in the IBIT ETF, Bitcoin ETF, watch 59.31. So again, nice to see a reversal today, but nothing really changes here. Same thing, I think, with the Ethereum ETF. These cryptos were warning us a little bit early that we were in a risk-off situation. They started to go down first, so I do like them coming back to life first today and kind of helping lead the move. But again, Ethereum has more work to do. All right, so what charts? So what did I do today? I bought some NVIDIA today. I like to buy NVIDIA on dips. I'm not very good trading this when it's around the highs, or when I think it's going to break out, I should say. I usually kind of like to wait for dips. I think that's worked better for me. I don't know if it's worked better for you than trying to trade breakouts right now, and at least over the last few months. Right, going back to last year, breakouts I was a little bit better with in this name. It's funny how some names you're very good at trading, and some names like not so much. But I know that I'm a better buy the dip trader in NVIDIA, and I did that versus some support. 179.65 was the level that I was watching. It was again, it was a little bit more clear to me on the 1 hour chart. Notice where I saw this hammer bar after we took out this VPOC, and then when it began to turn back up is when I got involved in NVIDIA this morning. All right, I did take a target. I actually took two targets. I took off about 50% of the trade, and I did that right in here. And that's just the way I'm operating right now. I feel much more comfortable holding some names, especially when they get a bit dicey. When I've locked in about 50% of the trade. Um, let's go through some other names. One standout name to me was SanDisk. Holy cow! This thing was all over the place in the early going. Tried to rally in the beginning of the day, and I was watching this in the first 15 minutes, and I was like, "Wow, is this thing really going to rip?" And it came right back down as the market, succumbed and started to go lower. But I wish I would have caught this one. I did not catch this one. I got a little bit squeamish with this one because I traded it about a week ago and lost money on it. So even though it's been such a star performer, um, but really, really strong. Is it extended? Yes, it's extended. You could look for opportunities in the whole group. Western Digital still staying above that 5-day moving average. Remember that had earnings what about a week ago? I think that was last Friday. Micron as well, still holding its own. And again, dips are getting bought in these things. Very methodical looking chart right now. Maybe watch if something changes, break above below the 20-day moving average. BE, I did add a trade in this one. A few other traders in the Tribeca Trade Group trading room also did the same. I really like this one, and it's funny because I was long this about I think it was about 2 weeks ago, and I was pretty disciplined. I took this thing off right when it started to kind of break, and I did this I think on this particular day, and then the following day there was a short report out. And I forget what short um, group released a short report about this, and I was like, "Geez, I'm glad that I got out of it, and I don't have to deal with the short." It's not fun to be in a name, whoever, regardless of like, oh, there's one out there that I don't want to mention any names that actually, when they put out a short report, the stock actually goes up. Or it goes up the very next day. That wasn't this particular group, but it was another one. Regardless, it's usually not fun to be in a name when some bad news happens or a short report comes out. But very impressive move. It had earnings this week, which I wasn't going to hold through earnings, but this is one that I would be watching. Let's just take a look at the weekly chart in here. It took out that VPOC on the high, right? So another situation where, just like we were looking at ones that were below price action, this one was above, and that's where this thing kind of halted. But now that that's removed, maybe it can continue on with its trend. CLS. Now I know this name is extended, but you know, I think the dip gets bought here. CLS just checking back to the 20-day moving average. This team has been a real all-star, and I like the look of it. Another one that I took a shot at earlier in the week, it didn't work out for me, but I said it might need a couple more days, and I like this thing resting here at the 50-day moving average, and nice bullish engulfing. Remember, big earnings gap. Well, it filled the earnings gap. I mentioned that the volume was a little bit too high in here, and it might need a couple more days. This was too much for me not to get involved with with this nice bounce. So that's Cloudflare. Couple other things that caught my eye today. Let me just go through a couple other names, that may be a little bit different. All right, Senmina, big, nice earnings gap up, kind of came back to the 5-day moving average. Sphere, probably a name that you're not paying much attention to. That's okay. This is tough to get involved in Sphere Entertainment, but really hell of a move on earnings. After already a nice move, and look at this thing go. I mean, that this was up early, by the way. Like this wasn't a late day move. This thing was strong basically all day today. So you try to look for things when the market's down that are acting very well. You could see it did take off, but you could see it never really sold off. Right, it wasn't down like that, and it just kind of hung in there when the rest of the market was selling off. So name that I'm going to have to pick. I don't know if I could buy this name, but I'm going to be watching it a little bit closer. And then finally, energy did pretty well. I got long a couple days ago. It was yesterday at the end of the day, even though this name didn't do much for me. This is Schlumberger. I've been seeing a lot of call activity in this thing. I checked the open interest on the calls, big block of calls that I saw yesterday. So I don't know why they're buying calls in this. We never do. Sometimes we could formulate an opinion. But the calls that I'm referring to are the December 40 strike calls, and the as well as what's seeing interest is the January 2007 65 calls. Big open interest on those 40 strike calls. So where does that line up? I would be looking for maybe a move right back here to the bottom of the value area. And this is a simple trade, right? If it breaks back below the 200-day moving average, I won't be in that. Another energy name that's been doing pretty well is Valero. I put this in the TTG trend portfolio a couple of weeks back, and it's been acting well. So like to have something a little bit different, especially at this point. Just want to give you the performance for the week. All right, so here we go. Here's the performance for the week. A lot of red, obviously, on the screen. SPY was down 1.6% for the week. The Dow 1.2, IWM down 1.9, Q's down 3.1. EEM and EFA both down for the week. Bonds were down. Oh, this should be in gold. Did finish green. The dollar was down slightly for the week. Bitcoin, even though we already reviewed Bitcoin, even though it had a nice day, still down 5.5% for the week. Blah, 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 blah. That's wrong for for growth. Let me see if I could correct that. Growth was down 2.9% for this week. So that's an easy fix. 2.9%. Solar had a big week, up 2.6%. Remember earlier on in the week, things like First Solar had a heck of a turnaround on its earnings report. Here's what the first bring this back. Here's what the First Solar report. Excuse me. First, sorry, it's been a long week. Here's what the First Solar chart looks like. Look at the check back. Right, this is the yearly value area. So that's not bad. Here's what that looks like. So again, if you want to take a long here, watch that top of the value area. That's 254. That's exactly where we bounced off of today. I was going to mention gold too. Gold tried to turn, right? Try to turn back up here. For me, this is fine. I got long gold about a week ago. Didn't get off to a great start, but I knew I needed to be patient with it. I knew with the new value area too, my support's 360. I mentioned XME as well. Again, still has more work to do, but I would watch 94.61. Again, this has been one of the strongest areas of the market this year. It's under followed, but it's been one of the strongest areas of the market. Healthcare also was up 1.3%. The banks were up this week. KRE was up 1.7%. That was also something I thought was very interesting. I think I tweeted this out this morning. Look at JP Morgan. Didn't even flinch this week. So again, it makes me think this week was just more about the AI trade getting extended, overcrowded, and needing some, a check back. Remember, tech was kind of hiding the weakness that we saw last week. We started to see it's been 8 days of where the S&P 4-week new lows have been higher than the new highs, 8 trading days in a row. So we saw this weakness starting in the middle of last week. What held up extremely well and then it succumbed this week was tech, and that got hit harder. Hence, if you look at the performance, Qs were down 3.1% this week. XLK, again, which was leading, led to the downside this week, was down 4.2% for this week. Biotech took a breather too, which both biotech and tech had a big October. Biotech was down 3.3% this week. All right, so Brazil had a good week this week. A couple things to kind of just go over in this Brazil chart. Still holding above the 5-day moving average. Latin America, one thing I don't like here is this VPOC being taken out. Usually we see a fade off of that, but for now, this group has been pretty strong. Let's see if we can maintain above that VPOC. All right, guys, I think I'm going to leave it here for the weekend. Enjoy the weekend. Make sure that you get away from the screens. Remember, when you do that, when you take time away from the screens, what does it give you? It gives you perspective, right? It gives your brain a chance to breathe, right? And you're when you do that, you could come up with ideas a little bit better. You could be a bit more clever too when you allow yourself to kind of get away from both the computer screen and your phone a little bit, right? When you do that, when again, when you exercise over the weekend, some ideas just come to you, especially when you've been in front of the screens all week long, and right? You know what charts look like. You know what they look like in your head. You don't need to constantly be in front of them. Those things will come back to you when you're least expecting, and could generate a nice idea off of that. So great week, in terms of the Tribeca Trade Group trading room. Was just very impressed at how everybody handled this week. So many people working together. That's what I really want to see personally. Um, I love to see that. I love to see traders. That's one of the reasons why I started Tribeca Trade Group, right? Was to try to get a group of traders who, want to achieve some goals together and that help one another, provide some ideas, communicate with each other, bounce ideas off of one another. So I couldn't be happier about how that's working at Tribeca Trade Group. So very good.